Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you my very first Goosebumps House of Shivers book review. And it's book number one, Scariest, period, book, period, ever, period. So I remember when this book got announced, I was really happy because Slappy World was finally coming to an end. And I know a lot of people were upset with that, but if I'm being honest, Slappy World as a series, even though I haven't read majority of the Slappy books in it, and I still have some other standalone books to read from there, and I guess a loose sequel as well, there are some gems in there, but near the back half of the series, I was just getting burnt out by just how disappointing the books were coming out. And I felt like Goosebumps was starting to kind of get into a slump. And then Fright Night came out, and I was like, okay, that's a good solid way to end the series. In my opinion, I thought Fright Night was a very refreshing book for Goosebumps. And this book was also another refreshing book for the moderns. So I think we're starting to hopefully be in a period where Stein has found some sort of creative groove again. Now, before I read this, I did see a lot of people's reactions to the book. This has a lot of positive reaction to it, as well it will receive from me. And I heard that this one was kind of a retread on the Legend of the Lost Legend setup. And that kind of threw me off because I'm like, Legend of the Lost Legend, in case you don't know this about me, it's one of my most hated Goosebumps books. And I'm probably going to review that right after this to see if I still hate it as much as I did when I read it a while ago. But this one didn't just have elements from that. Typical with the modern books, it borrows a lot from former stories. And I think Stein literally went to all the classic adventure books, at least the most popular ones like Deep Trouble, How I Got My Shrunken Head, The Beast from the East, and Legend of the Lost Legend, and kind of put them all into a blender and made this. And this story just exudes, everything that, I look for in these modern books. And it still shows that Stein has some ideas left, even though at the cost of blending some older concepts together. This one was really fun. And also what I love about this series, in case you don't know, that House of Shivers marks a new age of modern Goosebumps. There's a new cover artist, Robert Ball. The cover art looks fantastic. I thought that this was just splendid. And I can't wait to see what future cover arts he does. It was very nice to see this. I like that we're going back to the Goosebumps old logo and all of that. And also, a couple things here that you need to know about the series going into it is that this series marks the return to form that we saw basically back in the classic and neoclassic era of Goosebumps with the mainline series, original 62 and series 2000. They didn't have any overarching stories, any narrators, or, weird connecting prologues and stuff that we saw pretty much throughout every single modern iteration of Goosebumps up until this point. This one just is straight up story, and you'll know that off the bat. So if you're more of a fan of the classic books, this has that classic setup. The second thing is the font size are way bigger. So the fonts are, easier to read on the page, and that also helps increase page number in the book. And then the third thing is there's chapter titles that we've never really seen in Goosebumps up until this point. So that kind of threw me for a loop. Is it needed? Not really. And I think the chapter titles kind of spoils what happens near the end of each chapter. Constructively, I think maybe they shouldn't have done that, but I can definitely see maybe like teachers and school boards coming to Scholastic to ask them to add these chapter titles in Goosebumps books because kids are still reading them. So I can understand that. But yeah, if you haven't checked this book out, despite those things I just said, you really need to go try this out, especially if you're a fan of the more classical books. This is definitely going to itch a scratch for you. And might make you get into modern Goosebumps. This might be a good jumping on point in case you haven't read any of them. Try this out. So let's get into the plot overview with this thing. without giving too much away. So this book is divided into 3 acts. This is actually one of the few things that have carried over from the neoclassical era. We saw this a lot in Series 2000, where there's part 1 and part 2s inside of the book. You have this here. Modern Goosebumps is known for this. So if you're going to be taken aback by that, just know that up front. But the story starts off with these twins, Betty and Billy. And throughout the book, you get Billy's perspective. And off the bat, you get this dynamic between them as they're in a car ride with their dog. And they're heading to their Uncle Wendell's house out in the middle of nowhere that they really never visited or contacted with Uncle Wendell since they were very, very, very young. And the parents are off on it, about to go, drop them off so they can head straight to the airport nearby so they can get on a plane and head to London for business. And the kids are like, why can't we just come with you for 2 weeks? And the parents are like, well, here's the thing. You guys need to spend time with Uncle Wendell, and maybe next time we can do this, but it's so short notice that you have to basically stay with him. And the kids are bummed out. And Billy and Betty, you get a sense off the bat that Billy is the younger twin. He was born second, and he's the more fearful one. He's also short compared to his sister. She's tall. She's more brazen. She's more witty than him. And you get that sibling relationship off the bat. And Billy's also really into, the family pet, and so is his sister. And they're just kind of worried, yet also kind of thrilled to be with Uncle Wendell. And there's some unknowns with that Billy shares. The parents, though, since there's really no GPS directions, there's like no signal out where they're at. The car loses GPS signal, and they find themselves lost. And after a few, close calls of the parents getting stressed out because they're going to miss their flight and all that, they finally find Wendell's house, and they are in such a rush, they have to drop off the twins and the dog and say, hey, look, tell Uncle Wendell that we say hi and we love him, but we have to get going. So the kids are basically stranded there at the house, and Billy and Betty are struggling with what to do, but they end up deciding to go inside the house. They're calling out for Uncle Wendell's name. They don't hear anything. And then finally, they get approached by this man who had just woken up from his slumber. He has a long beard, and he's like, oh, Billy and Betty, good to see you. And he's acting he's caught off guard by it, and he's forgotten what happened. He was like, sorry, I was just out back, and I stepped inside, and didn't know you were here. My apologies. And Billy and Betty are like, oh, it's okay. And they're pretty much immediately introduced into Uncle Wendell's child, like their cousin. And she's much older, right? And there's something to do with the dog where they have to put the dog outside. And the kids are kind of bummed out, but that's apparently like the rule of the house, because the niece and the uncle don't like, or their cousin and their uncle don't like dogs or something like that. But once that's out the way, Uncle Wendell decides to make the kids more comfortable by sharing one of their famous stories that their parents were kind of like propping up to the kids that he's famous for. He's known for telling tall tales and stuff. And he sits them down and tells them about this, the story of the wayward forest that accompanies the home property, and that inside the wayward forest holds a secret of this book that is known to be the scariest book ever. And the kids are like, this sounds make-believe, this makes no sense. And the uncle pretty much drops a bombshell that somebody has stolen the book, and that it's up to them to go deep into the forest and find where this person may have hidden the book to protect this long family secret that's been, passed down from generations through the family. Billy and Betty are like, this sounds ridiculous, but I guess we have no choice to do this. And the uncle reveals that there's creatures inside of the wayward forest that have been uncharted by mankind, because the forest, because they were so far off the grid from human interaction, these creatures inside have been able to evolve into unrecognizable creatures, even though they're kind of everyday things. And one of the first instances of this is while they're listening to the story, they have this interaction with this man bat. And these bats have the heads of humans and they can talk. And the bat is whispering into the kid's ears, "You need to get out now." And their cousin shoos away the bat and says, these are typical creatures you'll find. Just don't listen to them. You got to believe us. So Billy and Betty, the next day, they get up early and they head out with their Uncle Wendell while their cousin stays behind at the house to kind of watch it and stuff from thieves, because apparently that's been a problem as well. They head out into the Wayward Forest, and almost immediately, Billy and Betty are approached with the horrors of what's inside the Wayward Forest. And I'm going to kind of just skim through the stuff that they go through here. Well, Uncle Wendell brought with him a machete and tries to lead them through the forest. But throughout this mid portion of the story, up until this point in part one, they end up encountering bears that are called flying bears, and they live in the tops of trees and they're humongous. And there's a close call with Billy where he almost pretty much gets taken and eaten, ripped in half, and that's pretty grisly to think about. There's also another scene involving a snake that can form 3 heads and stuff like that later on. These creatures are very weird. Like there's man bats we've already discussed. These are the type of things that are inside the forest. Well, eventually they get separated from Uncle Wendell after Billy and Betty, have a skirmish, and they end up getting stuck in quicksand pits, and they have to get pulled out by rope, and they are dirty, and it's getting dark out, so they realize that maybe it's going to be beneficial if we try to call 911. There's no cell service, so they put on this flashlight. They end up wandering through, finding giant moths attracted to the flashlight, and also encountering more man bats. And they try to turn the light off, but they're getting there's depictions of Betty getting bit and sliced by the moths and the wings of the moths. That's really gross. And the kids are freaking out, saying that maybe it's best if we turn back, because they end up finding a location where a machete is stuck inside the ground, and they hear screams nearby, and they're like, "We got to go back home, go back to Wendell's house." So they head back to Wendell's house, and on the way back, they're greeted by the dog. They couldn't bring with them for some reason, and they're happy to see the dog. But then they hear some shouts over in the shed, and this starts off part 2. They open the shed, and this guy's like, "Hey, thank you for rescuing me. I've been in here for 3 days. I'm actually the real Uncle Wendell." And the kids are like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! What do you mean the real Uncle Wendell?" And the guy that was in the shed brings him inside the house, makes some food for himself, and pretty much lays down what happened. That this man and what they thought were their cousin were actually known as the Bookworm and the Bookworm sidekick. And the Bookworm is a book thief after the Scariest book ever, because there's only one in existence. And many book collectors across the world want this book. But there's consequences with the book because it can unleash tremendous evil that mankind doesn't know about. And that's the power that the family's trying to protect. And that's the extent of it, that it goes down into what's inside the book that you'll get in the story. But the kids are like, "Okay, well, if these guys are bad, then I wonder what happened to them, because we found their machete out in the woods, and that's what triggered us to come back." Well, the Bookworm overhears this, overhears them when they're talking about, where's the scariest book ever, and Wendell, and the real Wendell is like, "Well, I actually hid it in plain sight from them. They're out searching in the woods. I have it hidden here." And they apparently hid it in some cookbook shelf. Well, the Bookworm overhears this, and and what they thought was their cousin has a flamethrower, and it's basically like, "Give me the book, and nobody gets hurt." And because they handed it over, it's kind of leisurely, it kind of pissed them off, and the girl with the flamethrower pretty much set fire to the cookbooks, causing like a house fire. And they pretty much, make out of the house. And Wendell's like, he's unreasonably calm about it. And the kids are like, "Why are you so calm about this?" When they put out the fire and they go to sit down, and Wendell's like, "Well, I gave him a fake book. This is actually where I have it hidden." So he takes him down to a second basement, or an adjoining basement, where there is a like temperature controlled room with Uncle Wendell's massive book collection, and there's a safe inside. And they're like, and he's like, "Inside the safe is where I keep the book." And again, because the bookworm thought that he was being double crossed, he overheard this again, told them to open the safe. They open the safe and there's nothing in it. And Wendell's like trying to say that, "Oh, well, I lied. The book doesn't exist. It never existed." And the bookworm and his assistant laugh at this, don't believe him, and tell him to get inside the safe for the time being so they can search the house from top to bottom, because they believe that the book's inside the house. So Betty, Billy, and their Uncle Wendell get inside of the safe, and they're pretty much left in there to suffocate to death. But Wendell has a key to the back of the safe, and they're able to escape through the back, get back into the basement, and now their plan is to leave the house. When they try to do that, though, they make a lot of noise, which attracts the bookworm, and they try to peel out the house anyway, and they make a run for it. Um, and after a certain point, the Uncle Wendell, while they're inside the Wayward Forest, is like, "I know exactly where it's hidden. It's hidden inside of this cave of locusts. We're gonna go straight there and deal with it." So they head there to the cave of locusts, and Uncle Wendell's like, "Well, the locusts are hibernating. They're asleep. Should be fine. So we're gonna go in here, just make sure that everything's, you're gonna be all right," and stuff like that. So he goes ahead and goes deep into the cave, but unbeknownst to him, the locusts are awake, and Billy and Betty have this whole ordeal. Before they ended up in the cave, though, they had to hide from the bookworm, and they literally had to hide in like a pile of worms. And they had all these worms on them, so the locusts tried to take the worms off of them and all that, which was really gross. So the locusts wouldn't eat them; they just ate the giant worms that crawled into their hair and their clothing. But after that ordeal, there's a third person running up to them, and this person looks a little bit older, and he's like, "Y'all, we are y'all okay? I'm the real Uncle Wendell." And the kids are like, "Oh, come on, this is like the third time we've heard this, at this point of the story. How do we know that you're not lying to us? We've already had multiple people say that, they're our Uncle Wendell." And he's like, "Well, I already tied up the person known as the bookworm and his assistant up at the house. I was trapped up in the attic. I was tied up. I managed to escape. I caught them from behind, put them up in the attic. This person here is somebody that I thought I could trust. He was a good friend of mine. He's known as the Collector, and he double crossed me, like the bookworm tried to do, and learned all my secrets. And now he knows the hiding place, and we have to stop him." Well, the person who's known as the Collector to this guy comes out, and he's like, "No, kids, don't listen to this man. I'm the real Uncle Wendell. I have the book here." And the kids are like, "Fine. Here's an ultimate test. Since Betty's name is short for something," they ask the two men, "All right, what's Betty's real name?" One of them guesses Elizabeth, one of them guesses Bethany, and the one who guessed Bethany was correct. So the one who guessed Elizabeth, of course, was the Collector guy, and he tries to attack the real Uncle Wendell and escape. But upon doing so, he has his own run-in with these flying bears, which separates him from the bag with the book inside of it. And the real Uncle Wendell, and the kids manage to grab the bag and potentially save the day. Now, part 3 picks up with that as well. You find out pretty much what happens through the rest of the stay with the family, and the kids are eventually picked up by their parents. But there's a plot twist near the final bits of the story, where the kids they end up home, but they realize they might have brought something from Uncle Wendell's or the Wayward Forest that wasn't supposed to be brought with them. And they're taken back by it, but they realize that this might be a fun thing to have, and it gets into really silly territory and kind of ends on a putter. But that, in a nutshell, is what you're going to expect out of Scariest Book Ever. So yeah, a lot to go over with this book because there's just a lot that happens in it, a lot of action scenes and a lot of set pieces to go over. But off the bat, I will say this about the Scariest Book Ever book here. This was a electric read from start to finish. This is some of Stein's best or prose that I've seen him write. It's up there with like The Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, with just how vivid every scene he writes in this book. The verbiage, the adjectives, they all just are perfectly blended here. There are some sloppy written Goosebumps books out there, but this book, its writing ability is just next level. It's one of those great, well-written books. I will say this about the main characters, Billy and Betty. They don't have much to them, but what we do get a sibling relationship, and you do get a sense of their personalities throughout the story. Betty, not so much, but Billy was very honest in his monologue about his fears, about his insecurities, about being the younger twin, and his relationship with his sister, about his wants to be with the family dog, and his apprehension of belief as he's going through these various Uncle Wendells throughout the book. I liked his character. I think he was very genuine, and that's all you can ask for with a character kind of stock like him. You don't really get a sense of his interests. It doesn't go too deep with him, but there's enough there to chew on where I'm not going to complain. Very great character, in my opinion, especially in modern standards. Billy was good, and Betty was a good supporting character. I'll say the villains of the story, there's multiple ones, and I like the concept because all the villains of the story, the collector, the bookworm, they're book collectors, and they're after this very rare artifact book that has like rare value and bragging rights for book collections, but also possession of this evil ability that can be unleashed to mankind and wield them some sort of status. And while that's kind of glanced over and vague in some areas, I think the main thing about the villains were they were threatening. Like the bookworm had a machete and his assistant had a flamethrower, actual weapons willing to do the deal. There was actual violence, kind of reminiscent to the Deep Trouble books back in the day, where Dr. Deep had violence enacted onto him by various assistants. It's kind of similar here with the real Uncle Wendell. He got hit over the head, got tied up. There's legitimate violence in this book, and you wouldn't expect that. The creatures of the Wayward Forest, I will say this, are freaky. Flying bears, man bats, the way those things are described are frightening. I love the moth scene. That was really tense and kind of creeped me out and made my skin itchy. So it was very effective. The creatures were well done. No complaints. The atmosphere, the Wayward Forest, and Uncle Wendell's house being, on the edge of humanity, right? I got the sense, kind of geographically what it was like in my head from the description of the book. But the atmosphere was going into the unknown. It was more of an exploration adventure type of book. And most of the time with the adventure Goosebumps books, they're kind of hit or miss for me. Most of the time miss. But this one was one of the more fun and engaging ones. They had a genuine mystery about the book, its whereabouts. You had a mystery about who's the real Uncle Wendell, who to trust, things like that. And you wouldn't think that going into this. But there was a lot of twists and turns I did not see coming. And I appreciate the book for that. And yeah, so this book had a tremendous amount of positives. But I do have some negatives with it. And I'll start off with the lightest one here. For me, the ending itself, I'll go ahead and start with this. It's kind of unorthodox for me to start with the ending. But the ending being so silly and how it kind of detracts from the experience that these kids went through with Uncle Wendell and the various other strangers that they interacted with at Uncle Wendell's house, kind of takes back just a tiny bit. It's not the worst ending ever, but it's one of those, it ends on a cliffhanger, and they do a purposeful dumb decision that they know is a bad idea, and I hate that. I hate that. Um, and yeah, it's here, but it's done it in a charming way, so I'm not overtly upset, and we don't see the consequences of it, so I guess that helps with the ambiguity. But I deducted point one for that issue. Yeah, very annoying. The second issue I have is, a lot of this backstory is being told throughout the various villains, like the Collector and the Bookworm throughout the story, about the origins of this said book, the scariest book ever. And through context, through the Collector being like so close to the real Uncle Wendell and knowing a lot of the secrets, a lot of that, it goes back to the family, trying to hide this book for generations type of thing. And they pick this house out by Wayward Forest, knowing that mankind's not going to go to Wayward Forest to protect the book at all costs because it can unleash evils among humanity. That's fine and all, but the parents in this story who are directly related to Uncle Wendell, I think the brother of Uncle Wendell is their father. The father just acts like has no recollection of this family secret. And I thought that was the direction they were going to go to by the end. That the reason why the parents dropped him off with Uncle Wendell was maybe that they were getting old enough to experience this, and maybe they needed Betty and Billy to actually try to help Uncle Wendell fend off some thieves or something. But no, the dad's like, did you have fun at Wendell's? The dad acts oblivious to this family secret that's allegedly there. And I'm thinking in my head, why is that even a part of the story if it's not going to get fleshed out? And that feels like an open end to the story. And I just don't like that. But the biggest thing for me, I would say my last negative here, comes down to this being an object or item focused story. And I've said this in the past many, many, many times in item focused stories. For me, I'm not a big fan of the delivery a lot of the time in Goosebumps, because Stein, I don't know why, he never really puts a lot of emphasis or care into the origins of objects. He usually will provide us a backstory about how a family acquired said object, but he won't go into the object itself, partly because I can see why on a constructive way for an author, because if you start to throw too much at the wall, not everything's going to stick by the end, especially if you're writing the book willy-nilly and don't have it planned ahead of time, which I'm assuming that Stein does. He comes up at the beginning and the very end and then tries to write the middle to connect it. Because of that, I can see why Stein does not focus on that, but that's annoying to me because it doesn't feel like a complete story. And that kind of ties into the book itself. The book is the catalyst for all the events happening in the story. Why these fake Uncle Wendells go through all that they go through to find it, but we never really understand what exactly is inside it. It's vaguely described as some sort of damnation to humanity, essentially. But we don't know exactly what's in it. Every time a character brings up, hey, what's inside of it? Oh, we're not going to speak of what's inside of it. It's that kind of thing. And it's frustrating, right? We don't ever see what's inside of it. We don't see what can become of it when it's opened. We just understand the consequences if it's opened, which is fine. But, I mean, where does this thing come from? Who wrote the book? We get a sense of, a time frame when they acquired it, but we don't even get a real sense of how the family acquired it way back. There's a lot of just loose things involving the origins of this book. And the fact that we hardly get the book itself and the contents inside, and we just get more of like an adventure out in the Wayward Forest, going on a hunt type of story, it's kind of a letdown in some ways. Even though I think the adventure and the hunting aspect was really fun and exhilarating, the item itself was a letdown, quite frankly. So with everything being said, I've already said I deducted 0.1 for the ending. For the vagueness of, the parents, recollection of this family secret and sending their kids knowingly into danger, and the lack of real origin behind the scariest book ever, the item itself, I deducted a 0.5 for those combined. I was a lot more lenient this time on the item focus than I have been in the past, if only because at least the book offers something there, and some sort of timeline of how they acquired the book, even though it's still vague. I was a little bit lighter than I have been in the past with some other books. But all said and done, I decided to give this book a B tier. You know, it's not quite an A tier for me. Those issues just aren't there that much in A tier books. I mean, these issues can be in A tier books, but not piled on like this. So I decided to stick with a B, and I gave this a high B at a 4.4 out of 5 stars, which is a B plus. This is a very good book, especially for modern Goosebumps standards. I will be shocked if anybody comes out and says that they hated this book. I mean, I know it's an adventure book. It's not. It has its horror bits and it has its frightening moments. But like I said, I just don't see how people could not like this book. This is one of those ones, I will admit, definitely feels like this is like an every person's Goosebumps story. There's something in this book for everyone, I feel. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Goosebumps House of Shivers, scariest book ever. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book before. Do you love it or do you hate it? And are you excited for more House of Shivers books in the future? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.